Alright, guys, so today I want to talk about the Uncharted movie from 2022. Since 4 years after the fact, I have finally managed to see the damn thing. It popped up for free on Tubi, which I am a frugal individual, so that's pretty much the only way I ever see movies, is whatever pops up for free on YouTube or Tubi or Pluto at the moment. So, yeah, I managed to finally see this movie, which I made a video talking about this way back before it even came out, and I never mentioned it again because I didn't see it until now. But now that I have finally seen it, I did just want to give my belated thoughts on it. Which, overall, I didn't think it was a terrible movie in general, but it didn't really feel like an Uncharted movie to me. Mainly because they completely failed to capture the characters accurately. None of the characters looked like themselves, talked like themselves, acted like themselves, and it came off as just a generic action B movie that they painted a superficial Uncharted skin on. Which, it's really unfortunate that it turned out that way, since Uncharted as a series, I think, does lend itself to being adapted into a movie more so than a lot of other video game franchises. Which, I'm against the concept of adapting games into movies to begin with. I just think it turns out badly 99% of the time. But if you are going to do that, I think Uncharted is one of the easier ones to do so, since obviously there's a lot of Indiana Jones inspiration there, and the games are already sort of cinematic in nature. So it seems like it would be easier to adapt that into a movie than a lot of other things. But of course, the production of this movie was very plagued with issues. They announced this originally back in like 2008, and it wound up not coming out until 2022. So obviously they had a lot of issues behind the scenes, which I'm sure ultimately did influence the final product. But if you look at it just detached as a movie in general, like, it was fine. It wasn't anything, earth-shattering or over-the-top fantastic. But if you just want a generic sort of cut your brain off, action B movie, it was fine. But if you go into this as an Uncharted fan, hoping for this to be, any kind of accurate representation of those characters or of that franchise, you're not really going to get that. They got Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg playing Nathan and Sully, and nothing against either one of them as actors, but they don't look like those characters. Their performance didn't really capture those characters. Their chemistry between each other was fine, but it wasn't the same as the chemistry between Nate and Sully in the game, which honestly is one of the most important things in my opinion, since, the interactions between those two is one of my personal favorite parts of the Uncharted games, and they didn't really capture that here accurately. Spoiler alert for anyone that cares, we are going to get into spoilers here, but Sully especially, Mark Wahlberg just can't be Sully. I'm sorry. I know the movie is supposed to be on a different timeline than the games, so this is supposed to be a younger version of Sully, so he doesn't have the gray hair or whatever. But he doesn't look anything like him. He doesn't get the mustache until, mid-credits scene that it feels like they just threw that in as kind of tossing a bone to people because they knew that people would be mad that he doesn't look anything like Sully. Tom Holland, again, he looks really young, which, again, this is supposed to be a younger version of Nate's as well. I'm sure that was an intentional decision for them to, cast a younger star so they could potentially have a whole series of films starring him, which apparently they are working on a sequel, so that might end up being the case. But he could work as maybe a younger Nate for flashbacks, but overall, I didn't really think that he captured that character accurately either. The only one that I thought was passably accurate was Chloe, who was played by Sophia Ali. I thought she did a decent job, and the writing on her seemed more believable for her to be the Chloe we know from the games. So that was really the only one that felt like themselves, at least to some extent. Now, as for the villains were entirely new characters. They weren't adapting anybody from the games, but they did feel like Uncharted villains. I thought they fit in well. Antonio Banderas was one of them, so he's always good. And one of the other main villains was what's her name, Tati Gabrielle. She played one of the villains in this movie. She also apparently played in that Last of Us show, which I didn't watch any of that garbage. And also, she's going to be playing the main character in Naughty Dog's upcoming Intergalactic game, which is where I recognized her from the trailer for that. Which that makes 3 Naughty Dog related projects that she's been cast in. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. But seriously, overall, I thought her performance was fine. The only real complaint there is, the modern Hollywood trope of, the tiny 100-pound woman beating up a bunch of large men. So, if you can get past that, then, I thought her performance as a villain was fine. Now, as for the plot, they did not directly adapt any of the stories from the games, which I think is actually a good choice. I don't generally like it when you take a game's plot and just adapt it into another form. That usually just results in a guaranteed inferior version of something that you already have. So they did go with an original plot, but they did it in kind of a weird way where they incorporated some of the set pieces from the games into this plot. Like the cargo plane scene from Uncharted 3, except this time it's over an ocean instead of over a desert. You got the auction house and the cave with a pirate ship in it from Uncharted 4. So it's reusing some familiar looking things. They did, adapt it and change it around to where it wasn't, totally one-to-one. Of course, they got the whole sequence at the end in the climax where they're carrying the ships out with the helicopters, which was not in the games, and that was a pretty cool sequence. So they did their own thing, but also pulled in some familiar elements while also changing some of the backstory of some of the characters and stuff. At the beginning, we get a flashback to an even younger Nate with Sam and their whole early interactions that was, again, seen in Uncharted 4. But they definitely changed some of the facts about that and how that whole situation played out and where Nate's got his ring that he wears around his neck. So it was sort of a weird amalgamation of kind of sticking to the story, except changing a lot of stuff, and then also doing their own thing, but pulling elements that have already been used elsewhere. So it was kind of a weird amalgamation of everything in that regard. I did think it was kind of funny that the treasure they're after in this movie is the lost treasure of Magellan, since that's the same treasure that was used in the Uncharted fan film with Nathan Fillion in it, which I'll put a link in the description to that if you haven't seen that. I'll take any excuse I can to shill for that fan film because it is absolutely fantastic. It's only 15 minutes long, but it is the pinnacle of what an Uncharted movie should have been and what it could have been. But sadly, we ended up with this instead. It's an absolute crime that we'll never get a full version of that Nathan Fillion Uncharted movie, since that could have been fantastic. That fan film also does a much better job of capturing the dynamic between Nate and Sully than this movie does. Like I said, that is one of the most important things to me. Another instance of that, actually, is the Uncharted novel, Uncharted The Fourth Labyrinth, which came out back in 2011, I think. But I actually just read it for the first time last year, and I actually really enjoyed that book. It was written by a guy named Christopher Golden, and he did a fantastic job of capturing that Nate-Sully dynamic and having them, banter back and forth. And it felt very much like the games did. Which, that novel is actually surprisingly more graphically violent than the games was, which is kind of odd. But if you are looking for a good Uncharted story, I do recommend the novel much more so than this movie. Check out the novel, check out the fan film. Of course, all of the games are good. go any of those routes if you want some quality Uncharted content more so than this movie. If you do want to watch this movie for whatever reason, as of this recording, at least it is still free on Tubi, so you can go that route if you don't want to pay anything for it. So you can check it out if you want to. It's not the worst thing in the world, like I said, if it was just a generic B movie that was its own original IP, it would be fine. It's an enjoyable enough plot, the action scenes are good. So as a film, it's fine, I guess, but it's definitely a poor representation of the Uncharted franchise. However, based on my reading anyway, it did apparently do at least decently financially, and I have read that they are at least planning a sequel. Now, this first movie wound up taking, like, what, a decade and a half to actually get made, so by the time this sequel comes out, Mark Wahlberg might actually look like Sully. But who knows if that'll ever see the light of day. If it does, I might check it out. Maybe. We'll have to see. Like I said, this movie isn't canon to the games. It's in its own timeline. So who knows where the story and a potential sequel would take them. There was a teaser at the end teasing, Sam being alive in prison, which lends itself to the Uncharted 4 plots maybe be getting adapted more. But again, they'll have to change a lot of stuff since they've already used portions of the Uncharted 4 plot in this one. So, who knows what the future holds in that regard. But yeah, as for this movie, it's alright, I guess, but it's not an Uncharted film, and it pales into comparison to a 15-minute fan film made on a small budget with Nathan Fillion in it. But yeah, anyway, I guess that's all I got to say. So, lots of luck to you and yours.